The next few minutes I want to talk about how we are using Aeron Cluster for a payment scheme in Switzerland. It's called Instant Payments. And I will tell you about how we use it and what are our experience with it so far. So what do we do? I'm working for a company that's called SIX. We are not doing car rental or these things. There is a letter missing and totally other logo. SIX is an acronym and it stands for Swiss Infrastructure and Exchange. And I am working mostly in the infrastructure part. And what are we doing exactly? We are developing and operating a system that is called SIX Interbank Clearing, or SIC for short. And we are doing this on behalf of the Swiss National Bank. And this SIC system is the central payment system for all the Swiss banks and other financial market participants who need to transfer money on a regular basis. The system processes some large value transactions. These are transactions that are only done between the banks, and also retail payments. These are payments for regular people, like bank transfers, direct debit transactions, and so on. Some numbers about the system. So last year we processed about close to 1 billion of transactions. 90% of which were retail transactions. And the more interesting number is the amount of money that was turned over in the system. It was 57 trillion, that's 10 to the power of 12 Swiss francs. And I looked it up today, it's about 50 trillion British pounds. And 90% of this turnover comes from these large value transactions. So it's just the opposite to the volume. Okay, a bit of history of this system. The SIX system was initially launched in June of 1987, so it's almost 34 years old. And now we are running the 4th generation of this system. We call it SIG4 internally. And we launched that one in 2017. It was a replacement of the former generation, and it was the first Java implementation of the system. Before it was running on an IBM mainframe system. And now for this instant payment scheme, which I will show you in the next few slides, we already started to develop the 5th generation of this system. This system is based on Aeron Cluster. That's the reason why I'm here talking to you today. And we went already live last November for friends and family, and the official market launch of instant payments will be August of this year, so in a few months. And after this market launch, we will start working on the full replacement of the former generation of the system, and we estimate at the moment that this will take us 2 more years to replace the system with this 5th generation. Okay, so as I said, the system is called SIX Interbank Clearing. So how does it work? I have a very simple example from the retail world. So for example, if you want to buy a car, most of the people cannot pay this car by credit card because the price would just exceed the limit of the card. And in Switzerland, what you can do is make a bank transfer. And this works something like this. So typically the buyer opens his e-banking application or mobile banking application, and he makes a payment order with his bank. And some unspecified amount of time later, the bank forwards the payment to our SIG system. We will settle the payment and forward it to the seller's bank. And some other unspecified amount of time later, the seller will see the money on his bank account or in his mobile banking app. So typically in Switzerland, such a transaction takes 1 business day, so Monday to Friday. So if I make the payment order today, the seller will receive the money tomorrow. Our system, however, is pretty fast, so the settlement takes a few milliseconds. If there is more load on the system, it takes a bit longer, but we are fast, but this whole business transaction takes quite some time. And that's the point where instant payments come into place. So how do they work? The end-to-end part is basically the same, but the times are different. So the whole business transaction should not take 1 business day, but only 10 seconds at most. And our system is required to take only 200 milliseconds out of these 10 seconds, because the reason is the banks have to do a lot more work for fulfilling this transaction than we do, and so we want to give them as much time as possible, and so we just want to take this 200 milliseconds for our part. And of course, the system has to run all the time for the retail market, because if you cannot use it anytime, such a payment scheme would not make any sense. So now I want to go a bit deeper into the building blocks of our system. So what does it consist of? And these are 3 parts from this high perspective that I'm telling you. The first important part and most important part is the account book. So there we will do the bookkeeping of all the processed payments. We have a thing called liquidity control, where we just make sure that each transaction is covered by the money of the bank. Then we have a component for communication. We are using a TCP-based protocol for that, where banks can send and receive payment messages. This protocol has not much evolved since the initial launch of this system, so it's pretty old. And we are also doing this security, all the security in this communication component. So we have transport encryption, message signatures, and so on. And the last component, also very important, we need storage, because we are shuffling around a lot of money, and we need to have evidence of all these transactions that we were processing, and we also need this data for further back office processing. For example, to charge our banks for the service that we provide to them. So, where and why did we choose Aeron Cluster? So, when we were thinking about how we could implement this instant payment scheme in Switzerland, we thought about what are the requirements of such a system. And so we identified 3 main requirements. That's the top half of the slide. The first requirement needs to be, we have to be predictably fast. So we have this 200 milliseconds. That's not high frequency trading performance, but it should be predictable and constant for us. Then the second requirements we kind of inherited from the current system. So because we are working with central bank money, it would be very bad if we lose any data. So also for this new system, we have to make sure that all the data that we are processing is preserved under any circumstances, even in case of some catastrophic events like the loss of a whole data center. And then the third point is, yes, we have to change the operating model from business days or business hours to 24/7 and always on. And then I'm coming to the bottom of the slide. So then we thought, okay, how can we achieve this with the current architecture? I made a little picture on the right side of the slide. So basically with the current system, we have a database which manages the account books and an application in front of it which does the business logic and just synchronizes its state to the database and back. And we were doing some tests if we could get the performance for instant payments out of the system, and the conclusion was yes, we could, but there were some drawbacks quite from the beginning. So it turned out that we would have had to tune the database right from the beginning. When we started developing this application, that's not a good thing to do when you start developing. We also would have had some very complicated upgrade procedures also related to the database. And on the application side, we would have had to introduce some more redundancy for fault tolerance and rolling updates, and this would have required some huge refactorings anyway. And that was the reason why we decided, okay, we don't want to use the current architecture, we want to create a new one. And that was also the point where we came in contact with Real Logic at that time, now with Adaptive. And we came up with a new system design. It looks quite similar on the slide. It's totally different in reality. We also have two main components in general. So on the right side, we have, I think, an application we call a processing cluster. And as the name suggests, it's based on Aeron Cluster. And that's the place where we are doing all the settlement logic, which is running in an Aeron clustered service. Then the payments that we are processing are just input events to this clustered service, and all the state, which are basically the account balances that we have to keep. We have this in memory and just update it based on the payments that come into the system. Then we are doing daily snapshot just to have a fresh start every day. Then on the left side, we have another application that we call Processing Gateway. There we do this secure communication with the clients. We have some business logic in it, but this is mostly stateless and used for validation and authorization of the payments. And as soon as these payments are considered valid and authorized, we just forward it to the cluster where they are settled. From the other direction, the cluster provides the gateways with some relevant data that can be kept in memory, just to do this validation work. So how did we deploy the system in our company? So we have 2 data centers available at the moment. We are talking about having a third one, but at the moment we have 2. And in each data center we deploy one of these gateway applications. And we do also encourage the banks to maintain 2 connections to both of these gateway applications. So we can then guarantee that at least one of these gateways is available all the time, and there are no disruptions for the banks. Then for the cluster, we are running it at the moment in a 4-node setup, which is spanned across 2 data centers, 2 nodes in each data center. And the reason why we are having this setup is that we can make sure that there is no majority of cluster nodes in one data center, and this will give us the guarantee that the data is geographically distributed and there will be no loss in case if a data center is lost. There will be a downtime, but there will be no loss of data. And finally, we are thinking about extending this setup to a 6-node setup. This would give us a bit more redundancy in the system, and it would also be a preparation for a 3 data center setup where we could just distribute the nodes across these data centers. Okay, that's basically what we did in the last few years. A few words about the experiences that we have had with Aeron Cluster. They are mostly good. The first experience we had is that our performance requirements were just reached. We didn't do anything, we just built our application and it worked well. And the second experience was Aeron Cluster works very well with our setup specifically. So we have to deal with quite large payment messages. They could be a few kilobytes in size, and it just works. And also the distribution of the cluster nodes across the data centers is not an issue for us. Then we get very nice support from Adaptive. So every time we ask a question, we get very detailed answers. We learn a lot from them. That's very nice to work. A few things that we had to learn kind of the hard way, where there are some steep learning curves when we implemented the new system. The first to mention was that are the Aeron APIs. They are very low level, and our development department at least was used for decades to write this classical application, business logic database. And when people of the department got in contact with the Aeron APIs, they were not so comfortable at the beginning. And if you have a bigger department, I think you should keep this in mind. That this is not something you get for free. The second very steep learning curve was changing the system to a 24/7 operating model. I think that has nothing to do with Aeron Cluster. I think that's just the complexity of such a system if you have to maintain it and update it while it is running. The next thing that we encountered was if you have a database, you can just query it and you see what's going on in the system. When you're switching to Aeron Cluster, then you have to build your insights by yourself, and you also have to find out what you want to see in the system before you can implement it. Then a few lessons learned. It's also related to this 24/7 operating model. If you are doing this, you have to plan and test very thoroughly all the changes that you are making to the system, if they are compatible with the currently running system in production. And not only have you to test it, you have also to automate this testing, so you get fast feedback in the development life cycle when something is not compatible with the production system. So I'm on my last slide. We are not done with the system, so we have this big migration in front of us. Our next step will be to look into standby cluster or cluster standby. I'm not sure which way around. There are two interesting features for us. The first are background snapshots, because we have to snapshot a lot of data. The data increases with the amount of transactions. And we also need to have some disaster recovery procedures in place, and probably standby cluster will provide a good solution for us. Then, of course, we will do some further system improvements. We will introduce more tooling to get more insights. We will have more automation and so on. Probably we will extend our cluster nodes to have more redundancy, and probably a 3 data center setup in the future. And the last and biggest step is this migration of the completion of the migration of the old system to the new platform, which will take about 2 years from now on. Yes, that's basically it. I think I'm also out of time. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions,
yeah, let's try a couple of questions. I've got one. I've got the mic, so I'm going to start. So you talked about the steep learning curve. Mm-hmm. What did you do to help your developers to climb up that curve as quickly as possible?
We had, I think, a little group. We started with a little group who took a deeper look into Aeron Cluster, and then we kind of extended this group until most of the people got familiar, or as familiar enough for using and working with Aeron. I think that's how we did it.
Okay, so choose a small group of folks and get them up to speed before then going wide.
Yes.
Yeah, cool, thank you. Any other questions, Stefan?
You mentioned that you're looking to go from a 4-node cluster to a 6-node cluster. I'm just curious, what is the pro and con of that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so when we have a 4-node cluster and do a rolling upgrade, you have just one, how do I say it, level of redundancy, and with a 6-node cluster you have a bit more. So you can take a node out of the system, do the upgrade, and can still have a failure. And it would also be the same setup if we introduce a third data center. These are our ideas behind this.
I guess, is there any downside to having more nodes?
Maybe I have to hand over this question to the experts.
Running more servers,
For
higher cost.
those folks that can't hear, and for the recording, Martin said more servers, higher cost. Yeah, we often find ourselves, both in the product side of the business and the consulting one, having conversations around customers' appetite to risk. So I was in one just recently. So a customer was really clear. They run 3 data centers. They want to be able to cope with 1 data center going away, but not 2. They've decided that that's their line. Other organizations, particularly stuff that heads towards international commercial infrastructure, has more demanding requirements and might want to go further the other way. So it's that balance between appetite to risk and cost, and how many clusters you have and where. Well, you can, with cluster standby, you can also add latency into the equation. So you can have a live cluster that's running super fast, and you can have another cluster running in another data center that's following maybe a second or so later. So if you can handle being down for a second, maybe a second of data loss, however often, however unlikely that is, but maybe you could handle a little data loss in order to give you faster performance on your home cluster, if you like.
Thank you.
One more question.
So the question was, I think your microphone was not turned on. I think the question was, if you have 2 data center and 4 nodes and 1 data center goes down, you have no majority and the system will not work, correct? And yes, we are aware of that. That's also why we are discussing having a 3rd data center, but we don't have one at the moment. And so for us at the moment, it's okay if 1 data center goes down and the system goes down, but we haven't lost any data because of this 2 and 2 node setup. It's good enough for us, but maybe in the future we need a 3rd data center.
Cool, thank you. And then one last question before we have a quick break for biology, I guess.
Yeah, just a question about state, really. I'm always interested to know, you've got all these payments coming in, like trillions of transactions, whatever. If you had to build that state up initially to know what the balances are, how do you manage that? Like, I'm talking about in our environment, we need to understand what is the current order book for it's might be a slightly different use case, right? But do you checkpointing, or is that something that Aeron offers?
Yes, so we are doing snapshots, and basically the balances are part of the snapshot. And so when we start the system, we load the snapshot, so we have all balances, and then we just run through all the payments that happened since then.